We have a quorum and it's time. We will first proceed to the election of chairman. And this is the Bills Committee on Road Traffic Amendment Bill 2017. According to Rule 22 of the House Rules and Appendix 4 to the House Rules, members can now make nominations, and a valid nomination would be made by a member and orally seconded by another member and be accepted by the member being nominated. Mr. Edward Lau. I propose Mr. Frankie Yek, and I accept the nomination. Is there a need to elect a deputy chairman? No? All right. Let's invite the administration in. Let's invite the administration in. First of all, we have Ms. Andy Chan, Deputy Secretary for Transport and Housing, Ms. Ann Chan, Principal Assistant Secretary for Transport and Housing, Ms. Stella Lee, Assistant Commissioner for Transport, and Ms. Janet Ho, Chief Transport Officer, as well as Mr. Vincent Fong from the Department of Justice. The Secretariat received a letter from Dr. Fernando Chang last night requesting to join the Bills Committee, and it was a late application. So according to the rules, I have to seek consent from the members present. Any objections? All right, thank you very much. So let's welcome Dr. Fernando Chang. Let's invite the administration to brief us on the paper. Mr. Chan, good morning. I'd like to thank Dr. Fernando Chang for joining. We are scrutinizing the Road Traffic Amendment Bill 2017. The amendment is straightforward, and it seeks to increase the statutory maximum passenger seating capacity of light buses from 16 to 19. Last June and December, we discussed the issue of light buses with LegCo, and with the approval of LegCo, we are tabling the above recommendation. I think we all know why we want to raise the number of seats in light buses. We have had light buses since the 1960s rather. At the beginning, they had 14 seats, and 20 years later, in 1988, the number of seats increased to 16, and it's been almost 30 years, so we are proposing 3 more seats. We can see that it's not easy to introduce extra seats at light buses at all. It's not that there is no demand for it. When we talk about public transport in Hong Kong, the utilization rate is 90%, which is highest in the world. And there are 7 main types of public transport, and we have further breakdowns in some categories. For example, taxis and light buses. We have green and red minibuses. So we have more than 10 modes of public transport. So we are spoiled for choice. But we can also see that competition is intense, and different modes are interconnected. So there is direct competition between different modes of public transport. When considering the amendments, the government would not just look at passenger demand. We want to make sure that Hong Kong people can continue to enjoy the diverse modes of public transport, and we hope that the competition would be healthy. In our LegCo brief, we explain why a balance of the ecology of the trade is important. Why did we propose 19 seats? In paragraph 11, which is on page 4, we explained the 3 indicators. First, we asked our consultant to conduct a study to look at the route packages with left behind passengers at the peakiest hour and 70% of the routes had left behind passengers. If we increase the number of seats to 19, the ratio will drop to less than 40%. As for the waiting time of the routes, we took 10 minutes at the cutoff line. And during peak hours, if we can introduce 3 more seats, the drop in waiting time would be nearly 80%. So for about in 20 odd routes, there are left behind passengers, and after introducing the extra seats, the drop in the number of routes with left behind passengers will drop by 80%. And I think we all know that it's hard to hire drivers recently, and a lot of route packages are making losses. So the operating environment is challenging. Right now, 50 to 60% of the routes are losing money. If we can introduce 3 more seats, only 30% of the route packages will make losses. Of course, we are not saying that they can make a lot. So these are the justifications for introducing the seats. The bill also deals with relevant issues. So we are talking about public light buses, including both red and green minibuses, but there are also private light buses. And they also told us that they needed extra seats, and they are mainly school buses. So the relaxation in number of seats also applied to private light buses. So how do we distinguish buses and light buses? Apart from dimensions, the number of seats is also a criterion. Anything under 16 seats would be considered a light bus, and anything over would be considered a bus. If we increase the number of seats from 16 to 19, well, some buses carry 17 to 19 seats, so it's about their whether their identities need to change. From our experience of the legislative amendment in 1988, the transition was smooth and they were allowed to remain as buses. So these are technical amendments. I want to stress that this is a cap, so we are not forcing all light buses to go to 19 seats, and the law retains flexibility in that the trade can decide whether they would go for models with 19 seats. And with heavier models, they might have to pay more in fuel. So there's flexibility in this. Thank you very much. Before members ask questions, I'd like to remind members that according to 83A of the Rules of Procedure, at any LegCo meeting or subcommittee meeting, members may not make any amendments or motions or any items with conflicts of interest unless members are declaring the nature of such interests.
The first member who would like to speak is Lau Kok Fun. 5 minutes each. Mr. Lau. Thank you, Chairman. I do welcome the increase of upper limit of number of seats from 16 to 19 by the Bureau. This is not easily obtained because in the last legislative amendment took place in 1988, almost 30 years from now. So after so many years, they propose to increase seating capacity. I would try my best to ask the administration to raise it to even 20. The Bureau just said that they had expressed views to the panel as well. And at that time, most members, including myself, would like to see 20 being the upper limit. Sorry, I'm not feeling quite well with my throat. I would like to share with you a figure. Now, almost 1/5 of the minibuses can take 20 passengers when they are manufactured. And now concerning my suggestion to increase seating capacity to 20, well, in other words, seating capacity will increase by 6%. And in other words, there will be an additional 271 16-seat minibuses. And during peak hours, the problem of not enough GMB can be solved. Apart from increasing the upper limit, well, some drivers' requirements have been relaxed, but then in a short period of time, you won't see many young people entering this field. In the minibus industry, still many drivers are quite senior in age, and then the median age of drivers of minibus is 60. So this is quite a serious problem. So based on the research figures from the government, if the upper limit is increased from 16 to 19, then those passengers left behind can be reduced from 70 to 40%, and waiting time for over 10%, well, with such occasions can be reduced as well. So if we can actually reduce that for more than 80% or even more, and that would be much better. I have quite enough justifications because I am a councillor representing the North District. So I hope the consultant and the administration can visit the North District, especially the rural areas. During the morning peak hours, I understand that the administration will have to strike a balance among different ecosystems. But then in the new territories, in many places, apart from minibuses, there are no other mode of transport that can replace minibus. So in the morning, you can attempt to find vehicles or mode of transport to come to the new territories. You won't be able to get that. So will the administration consider our suggestion of raising the upper limit to 20? Permanent Secretary, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chan. I think you have been striving hard. We can feel that. In para 13 of the paper, in fact, we have set out members' views. So quite a lot of members during the meeting suggested to the government to raise the upper limit to 20. And in the paper, we explained why 19 is a better figure or a more appropriate figure. Mr. Lau made 2 points which are related to our consideration. First, vehicle model. Right now, in the industry, there are the so-called longer vehicles or shorter vehicles. In other words, for short vehicles, even if they exhaust the length of the vehicle, only 16 passengers can be seated. And if we have this amendment passed, then in other words, if they would like to make full use of the seating capacity of 19, then they have to change the vehicle model. And in fact, the so-called short vehicles account for 80% or above. And then there is another type, the longer vehicles. And the longer vehicles would be subdivided into 2 or 3 types. So among 700 odd vehicles, more than 600 of them can at most take 19 passengers. So that is subdivision 1 of the longer vehicles. Mr. Lau referred to the second type of longer vehicles. So they can take at most 20 passengers. So out of 4,300 odd minibuses, less than 2% belong to this subdivision. So these are the figures related to the existing models. Now, but these do not affect the government's decision. So how was this number 16 derived? Because the government's current policy is 16, so that's why. And we believe that if there is adequate time, since things are not mandatory, the market will respond to the policy. So car model can be adjusted to accommodate the maximum seating capacity. So no matter what the existing models are like, well, that is not our consideration. If the government's policy is skewed towards a certain vehicle model, then there may be the saying that we are skewed towards certain manufacturer. In fact, we won't take into consideration the product characteristics of a certain manufacturer. So definitely, we make independent judgment, and we think that 19 is appropriate. Concerning the actual circumstances, I have some understanding about the traffic condition in the North District. Well, actually, Hong Kong is a very dense city, so all the public modes of transport are very congested, not only minibuses. We're talking about 12 million person trips, which is the biggest in number in the world as a utilization number. So what is the difference between 16 and 19? If we turn to page 4, footnote 7, well, you can see the difference. Let me explain in greater detail. If we talk about left behind passengers, if we increase to 19, then para 11 of the paper states that the routes with left-behind passengers will be reduced from 70% to 40%. So in other words, with these 3 additional seats, the decrease exceeds 30%. So on average, 1 additional seat can reduce the number of routes with left-behind passengers by 10%. So when there are the 4th seat, then footnote 7 is telling you that the percentage is no longer 11 percentage points, but it should be 2 to 3 percentage points. So in other words, the number of left-behind passengers is usually 3. It is seldom to see 4 or 5. So with 1 additional seat, the effectiveness of reducing left-behind passengers will be much smaller, from 11 percentage points to 2 or 3 percentage points. But of course, you may say that it is not a bad thing to achieve that as well. That's another point. But then this figure 19 is not only a guess. There is numerical analysis behind. So why 19 and not 20? There is no blind insistence of any government official. Well, we would like to see a new scene, so we don't want to miss this opportunity. And it has been over 30 years already. So we are worried that if the balance is damaged, we won't be able to go back. And the industry won't even accept 19. And in that case, we will be worse off. And we will be at a standstill. This is not a blank speculation. The bus companies have expressed their concerns. And in fact, the New World First bus had expressed concern, but KMB welcomed the change. Well, they have expressed their written concern to us. Perhaps they realized that the proposal was not really 24, unlike the original request. Mr. Lau, can you wait for your next round? Well, I haven't finished. The taxi industry has expressed deep concern in writing, so they expressed their written objection to us. Well, we have regular meetings with the industry, and based on our understanding of the industry's response, well, they basically can accept 19. As regards whether the concerns can be alleviated or allayed, we cannot tell for sure now, but then, of course, members can express your views. I think public transport users would like to see more seats, but then when there is one more additional seat, then would there be other concerns? Well, we have used up the time, but then this issue is important. Okay, Mr. Lau, can you follow up in your next round? Next, Ms. Yong Hoi-yen. I'm happy to see this change from 16 to 19. I hope that the waiting time can be shortened and the industry's development can be helped. Concerning the ex gratia subsidy, well, just now the DS said that there are long and short vehicles. For the long vehicles, now if they can be modified without replacement, then that's good. But then there are 3,000 odd short vehicles, then there can only be increase of seats if the model is replaced. Now for Euro 2 diesel cars won't be renewed, won't have their licenses renewed next year, and people have to replace their vehicles by the end of December this year in order to get the special subsidy. But because the law is not passed yet, they cannot apply for 19-seater for the time being, so they have to delay their vehicle replacement. Now, if this bill is not passed before the end of the year, then is it possible to exercise your discretion to extend the time period for applying for the special subsidy so that they'll have enough time to have their vehicles replaced? DS. Now, concerning this concern from the industry, we have realized that from Mr. Yik and also from the Environment Bureau. Talking about the minibuses, which are Euro 2 models, well, most of them have plans for a replacement. Today, if members can pass this amendment, then there will be enough time for the bill to be passed within next month. Then this is helpful to the industry. Starting from June last year, we said in public during LegCo meeting that we do have the intention to increase the upper limit of number of seats. So there has been open discussion about this number 19. The industry, including the manufacturers, should have enough preparation time. They should not be waiting till today. If there are other concerns in the industry, then it all depends on the progress of scrutiny of this bill and also progress of the industry in procuring vehicles. If there can be conducive policies from the government, then the Transport and Housing Bureau will relay views from the industry to the relevant departments. All right, Ms. Yong, any follow-up? No? Next, Mr. Chen Man-ban. Thank you. Just now, Ms. Yong made a point which reflects the concern of the industry. As Mr. Lau said, well, there are voices asking for 20 seats, and we have heard a lot about this comment. However, because of the subsidy having a time limit, so the industry has accepted this 19 number.
In reality, if the government is willing to delay the subsidy so that we have more time for discussions, it can only be good for the trade. And there are a number of issues. For example, the aging drivers would introducing extra seats actually help. In terms of the fares or charges, does it mean that most fleets would not have to pay charges for the coming year? Can Mr. Chen tell us why Ms. Eunice Yong's proposal is not feasible? That's within the ambit of the Environment Bureau. So, but this is a decision of LegCo or the Finance Committee. For financial arrangements endorsed by Finance Committee, if there are major changes, LegCo approval is generally required. All right. So we know about the decision of the Finance Committee. If members have any suggestions, they can inform the Finance Committee or Environment Bureau. In terms of introducing seats, as Mr. Edward Lau suggested, at some remote areas, light buses are the only mode of transport. At newer housing estates, at certain areas, the government has been building public housing. Some new populations have moved in, and light bus routes have been provided. The same light bus routes are serving the extra population, so by introducing seats, hopefully you can relieve the burden. But apparently the government feels that 19 seats are enough. Why don't you raise it to 20 so that the trade can enjoy more flexibility when purchasing vehicles? The laws were amended in 1988, and it's been a long time. Why don't you raise the cap to 20 so that the trade can enjoy more flexibility? They might not choose to go up to 20, and by the time more models are available, they can replace their vehicles. If you set a cap at 20, then 19-seaters might be cheaper. So why don't you consider this? Mr. Chen? I understand members' demands. The point of introducing extra seats is to shorten the waiting time. As for the actual cap, it requires discussion. Public transport means business in Hong Kong, unlike many other places in the world. Every operator has to invest in hope of returns. It doesn't mean that the government would not touch the system. That's why we are making this leap. We are talking about an increase of about 20%. Some parts of the trade told us that 20% is equivalent to an extra 800 light buses on top of the existing 4,350. If we further increase the number of seats, then it's equivalent to more light buses on the roads. So their perspective is different from that of passengers, and we see where they are going. So we decided to raise 3 seats, and 4 might be the ultimate limit. So do we really have to hit 20? It might not be the case. There might be a backlash or objections from some parts of the trade, and the bill might face further challenge. When striking a balance between different parties, the government must be determined, and we must be bold. We see 19 as an ideal number. Thank you. I think Mr. Chen has repeatedly explained his justification. I'm sure Mr. Ben Chen will follow up later. The trade has written to various political parties on whether they on their support on 19 seats. Mr. Michael, look, I have just shared your letter with members, and I have read your letter, and I had a talk with the legal advisor. It has no direct relation to the motion or the bill today, but you can take this opportunity to give your view since the THB is here. Thank you. We support increasing the number of seats to 19 in principle. For passengers, of course, this is good news. From an employer's point of view, their operating environment would improve and they can make more profit. I think, however, the welfare of frontline workers have been ignored. Mr. Chan, we have discussed this issue earlier, and you said that there should be a consensus on the meal hour with pay. We request 50 minutes of paid lunch hour, and for salary deductions over $300, it is not reasonable, but it still exists within the trade. I hope that green mini buses would no longer adopt profit sharing. this is not like industries like retail. Salespersons might earn more commission if they work harder. But for drivers, the amount of profit does not relate to the drivers. It's about the popularity of different routes, the road conditions, etc. But if you adopt revenue sharing, then some drivers might drive aggressively and they jeopardize the safety of the drivers themselves, their passengers, and road users. So how would you address the needs of frontline workers and workers' unions? As the chairman said, this bill does not relate directly to frontline workers, but we believe that if employee benefits can be enhanced, well, we believe that they can be enhanced. So this is a point of focus in our discussions. The department also looked into the issue you mentioned. Ms. Lee, Mr. Lucht is concerned about the basic payment. According to the passenger permit, there must be an employment relationship between the operator and the drivers, and the employment arrangement must satisfy the employment ordinance and relevant laws, for example, rest days and holidays. For the actual terms of hire, they are agreed between employees and employees, including actual salaries, working hours, etc. As we know, in over 90% of the routes, and drivers have fixed salaries as well as subsidies or allowances, and there are various means of revenue sharing. Like other trades, operators should draw up the salaries of drivers based on their businesses, so we would not impose any requirements on them. In terms of the number of working hours, we have talked to workers' unions and operators, and based on the supply and demand of drivers, the restrictions of vehicles at termini, operators are willing to increase the amount of rest time, including meal break. For every 9 hours of work, a driver would get at least 45 minutes of rest, including a meal break. So this is a consensus at this stage. We are still carrying out consultation. If there are no objections, I think the revenue sharing would lead to speeding in green minibuses, and you have to tackle that. For buses, you feel that revenue sharing is normal, but for light buses, revenue sharing would be an incentive for drivers, and that would lead to speeding. I think we can discuss this at a later time. As I said, your letter is not directly related to the bill, but I'm allowing you to exchange opinion. Dr. Fernando Chang, thank you. I'd like to thank you for allowing discussions on the salaries of workers, even though this is not directly related to the law or the bill. But we hope to improve the work environment and safety of light bus drivers, and the revenue sharing system leads to speeding light buses. It has been a long-standing problem, so I agree with the FTU on this. I'm more concerned about persons with disabilities. I understand that the government has a public transport policy in place. And the objective is allow everyone to use public transport or transport for all. The situation now is not ideal. We have very few barrier-free taxis, and basically we have no barrier-free light buses, so we have to rely on rehab bus. But the supply has been very short down the years, and you have to book ahead of time, and the rejection rate is very high. It's up to 10,000 cases per year. The majority were bookings to hospitals, so this is not ideal at all. By increasing the number of seats at light buses, I hope the government would try to promote transport for all. Since you have a strategy and policy already, you should do something. And you shouldn't allow the market to do whatever they want. But basically, the government has been ignoring it. Apart from encouraging the trade to increase the number of seats when replacing their models, they can also introduce low platform light buses. According to the paper, they can operate on the three hospital routes.
Apart from this, nothing else. Now, concerning the low platform buses, of course, the cost is much higher. I've heard that the cost will be 100% more. So now the cost of existing model is 700,000 for low platform vehicles. Well, the cost may be 100% more without subsidy. How come or why do you think that the minibus operators will be willing to introduce this model? So we're talking about 3 routes, and the operators are asked to accept that. But what else are you doing to achieve your policy objective? DS? Well, let me take the question. I think Dr. Zheng's question is quite fair. We're talking about aging population. So when the disabled and also the elders alight the minibuses, it may not be easy because of the step. Now, barrier-free transport is a long-term goal. It won't be achieved overnight. When I joined the industry, I was an assistant to member, and at that time I knew Dr. Zheng already. So, well, the situation is different every day. It is not true to say that there has been no improvement, but can the goal be achieved overnight? I must say that public transport in Hong Kong is a commercial operation, but it doesn't mean that the government is not doing anything in terms of public policies. For example, the diesel tax is waived already. So this is to facilitate the industry's operation. Now, 3 additional routes represent a breakthrough, and it is difficult to have them. Mr. Zheng, you already said that cost of vehicle is 100% more. Besides, passengers and drivers will have to adapt to the situation. When a wheelchair-bound passenger gets on and off the minibus, will other passengers need to adapt to the change? Rehab bus has been operating for many years smoothly, and so this experiment is necessary. With these 3 hospital routes, if all parties find it acceptable, and after that, if there is policy support, then I think the goal can be achieved. We cannot aim at achieving the goal at one go. So perhaps we should allow smooth operation of these 3 hospital routes first. Now, Dr. Zhang, perhaps you can try the routes with the disabled people bodies and see whether the drivers can adapt to the change and what passengers' reaction is like. Then I think we can have more inclusion in society. Things are not that easy. Now, I think it is already a complicated matter as to whether passengers should get on in front or at the back. For rehab bus, passengers get on at the back because the whole bus takes passengers of the same type. However, on a minibus, if most people are in a rush and all of a sudden with a new product coming or being introduced, what should the getting on and off arrangements be like? Well, I think after the trial, I think everyone can raise his suggestions as to how we can have barrier-free transport. It's difficult. With this arrangement on minibus, I think the department has been subject to a lot of pressure. Let me supplement. There is this test on minibuses, and now for some taxis, new taxis coming in next year can accommodate this arrangement. So this is an improvement. Of course, the fares will be different. Chairman, I still have a lot to follow up. Even for taxis, even if we take into consideration the new initiative for next year, well, it has taken more than 10 years because the replacement is in phases. So even if the industry will bring in the Toyota taxi model, but it is on a per taxi basis. It is not true that next year all taxis will become barrier-free. I think it will take 8 years, 10 years' time. My understanding is different because a batch of vehicles will have to be replaced. Of course, a replacement has to be done on a per vehicle basis. That's true. Next, Mr. Tam. Thank you, Chairman. Well, if there are 20 seats, well, I will support that, of course. If you say that is not feasible, then we will accept 19. I think the industry has made those points. So I won't dwell upon whether there should be 19 or 20. Referring to para 19 of the paper, well, I would like to spend more time on that. Concerning this low platform model, well, it is wheelchair accessible. And there will be 3 routes, 3 vehicles. So when it comes to low floor minibus, well, it will be more convenient for the elders, not only for wheelchair-bound passengers. If more routes can be accommodated, then more wheelchair-bound passengers will be convenienced. Let me first talk about the low-floor vehicles. Now the biggest problem is that you have put restrictions on length, width, height, and also weight. There are now many low-floor vehicles which are only slightly bigger than the current ones. Now it is 7 meter long, 3 meter high, and 2.3 meter wide. In many discussion websites, there are points that the new model is very suitable in Hong Kong. So 7.1, 2.4, only slightly bigger or longer, and also a small difference in weight. So if you do not relax the restriction, now some members of the public are worried that there are restrictions on the size of the bus. Now with more seats, then will the seats be smaller? If we can bring a new model which can also facilitate the low floor arrangement, then I think the government can relax the restrictions. You don't need to wait for the low floor model for wheelchairs. These are two different types. And you're saying that you want an additional step for minibuses, so 3 steps instead of 2. So that will make things better for the elders. So if you are willing to relax the dimension restrictions, then some problems can be solved. People and minibus operators will have more choice. They can bring in new models. Now, when it comes to the roads of Hong Kong, there are some bans. And I know that there are some restrictions about 7 meter, for example, somewhere down LegCo. But can we change that to 7.5 meters? I don't know. It all depends on the actual road conditions. If not, then can the roads be modified? Or you can just restrict the entrance of those vehicles. If there are longer vehicles, 7.5 meters long, then, well, they cannot be accommodated in some parts. I think you can review the GMB routes. How many parts or how many of those routes will go through the 7 meter maximum bands? You may say that it is there are reasons behind this 7 meter restriction, but this point is not meaningful. You have to tell us how many GMB routes will be affected by the 7 meter restriction. So can the requirement be relaxed, and have you done any survey? Now, Mr. Tam, do you know what is the cost difference between the low floor vehicles and the current buses? No, I don't have any information. Well, which government official will take the question? Mr. Chan? Okay, concerning vehicle length, Mr. Tam is right. The most important point is whether it's useful. But this is not only related to road design or public transport support facilities and so on. Well, all along, the statutory rule or restriction is 7 meters. One extreme example is right-hand steering or left-hand steering. Now, for some vehicle models, there are special functions, and those functions are indispensable. In that case, the government can consider whether the rules can be relaxed, and we can see whether road facilities need to be modified. So we share the same thinking. Please rest assured that it won't be the case that the rules are very rigid or the road facilities are fixed, that we have to stick to the original arrangement. No, we are talking about low floor vehicles. Perhaps Mr. Zhang is very familiar. For low floor vehicles, it means that wheelchairs can be accommodated. We don't need to say that certain vehicles are suitable for wheelchairs. We don't want to always name wheelchairs. And this is also convenient to the elders as well. So, regarding low floor buses, 2 days ago we discussed this with Mr. Zhang. Within this year, all buses in Hong Kong will be low floor, now 98%. And for the sharp bends in Lantau Island, we cannot have low floor vehicles, otherwise the buses will tip over. Now, very soon we'll have all low floor vehicles where the elders and wheelchair-bound passengers will be convenienced. And it is true that these buses will be suitable for wheelchair users. So we will have a trial on 3 hospital routes first. We will look at the driver's response and passengers' response. And then next we'll look at the length of the vehicles. Later on, perhaps our colleagues can supplement. The vehicles are longer than 7 meters. For minibuses that can accommodate wheelchairs, well, they are longer than 7 meters, but so they are not allowed under the law. But when it is necessary, there can be a waiver from the 7-meter rule. So the commissioner will waive these models. So if everybody loves this new model, and if it is acceptable to all parties, then the next step will be to see whether the laws will have to be amended, and will there be the need to renew or modify some road facilities. Now, at the minibus stop outside Queen Mary Hospital, it will take some skills for drivers to maneuver the minibus. You may not be able to achieve it or do it in one go, at one go. Next, Mr. Michael Tin. Thank you, Chairman. In 2014-15, Chairman, when I was the chairman of the Transport Advisory Committee, I talked to Mr. Cheung Bing-leung, and we set out the coming work. At that time, there was an issue which has been discussed for more than a decade, but still it was not achieved. And many people have chased after me in my district. I have never imagined that in 2 years' time, this matter can be realized after being discussed for more than a decade. So I must commend the Secretary for being so responsible. There are only a few months left. Recently, there was not much news as to who the future Secretary for Transport and Housing will be. I would hope. Well, I must say that Mr. Cheung Bing-leung is very familiar with the issues, and no one is more familiar than he is. We're talking about parking and the breakage of electric cables and so on and so forth.
咁有兩樣嘢咧，我就唔知道，應該同立法冇關。
And there are 2 points which might not be relevant, but nonetheless I would like the government to know. The public generally looks for more seats, but they don't want any fare hikes. In recent years, the transport fares have been going up, and this is hard to stomach for them. And the median wages cannot catch up, especially for the grassroots. For the trade, a lot of routes are losing money, and a lot of passengers have been lost to the railways, and they have challenges recruiting drivers as well. So I think this would really solve a lot of problems. And I've been talking with the light bus trade, and they said they wouldn't raise their fares in 2 years. And the Commissioner for Transport would vet the price or fare increase applications. So I hope that the trade will not raise their fares for 2 or 3 years. For the Transport Department, when they vet the applications, well, for certain routes, some models might be replaced and some not. I think you can consider the weighted average. If you do grant the applications, then you can take the weighted average and allow them to raise the fares of their fleets by 5%. So I think this is something you can consider. So then you won't create the impression that you are biased towards the trade and that you are thinking about the passengers as well. In terms of safety, there's a flaw in the design of light buses, and that is the seat belts. Right now, even if passengers don't put on seat belts, they would still continue, and drivers have no way to know whether passengers are putting on the seat belt. And when purchasing new models, the most would comply with the Euro green standards. So I want to deal with the issue of safety belts as well. We have so many light buses in Hong Kong. There's no reason why we are not protecting the safety of the passengers. If we require the light buses to install sensors for a lot of private cars, there would be warnings if passengers do not wear seatbelts. I don't know if we can legislate for this. If not, how can we achieve it? Mr. Chan. The Transport Department has certain rules when vetting applications, and we have to be more stringent in gatekeeping. So I think you should strike a balance. In terms of seatbelts, you have told us about the issue, and we have followed on that. For vehicles replaced after 2004, they must be installed with safety belts, and right now 70% are installed with safety belts. For the remaining 30%, we learned from the trade that once the bill is passed and that vehicles are replaced, there would be another peak period, and by then the majority of light buses would be installed with safety belts. Currently, some light buses are equipped with safety belts, but some of them are not. So some passengers might feel that the responsibility is not on them, and they might not feel that it's necessary to put them on. On taxis, passengers did not have to wear safety belts, but subsequently passengers were more willing to put them on. You know that this is not the point I'm at. The driver said they could not enforce it. They would not know who is putting on the safety belt and who not. In the market, no vehicle is installed with sensors. We will keep tabs on the situation. What about private cars? Well, we understand that this is not a cutting-edge technology. I think we have to talk to the trade on the actual implementation. So would they require all passengers to wear seatbelts before the light bus departs? If we legislate for that, if there are warning signals, and there would be pressure on the passengers to put on the safety belts. Mr. Tian, your time's up, so I don't want a debate on this. This is not within my policy ambit, but I will relate to my colleagues. If the police carries out more enforcement, passengers would be more compliant. I've been penalized before. So I will put on my safety belts in the future. Next, Mr. Edward Lau, 3 minutes. Thank you. I understand there's a need to balance interests of the trade. So at the beginning, we talked about 24 seaters. So After the consideration, I decided to propose 20 seaters. There are 3 objectives to the amendment. First, improve the business environment of the trade. And second, we have to balance the interests of the trade. And 3, we hope that more passengers can board the light buses. Why do I insist on the difference of 1 seat? Because I have to explain myself to the public. Myself and Mr. Ben Chan, well, in rural villages or areas, you said that the figure for 20 seaters is 3 to 4%, but for people living in rural or remote areas, the difference is much more significant than 1 seat. And when the 12.8 meter buses were introduced, they might not comply with the laws. So did they consult the light buses and taxi trades? We talked about low-floor buses and hospital routes, but when I discussed with the trade in the past, they said that the costs would increase. So with more seats, our costs will go down. So I would have more incentive to implement these things. So everyone would benefit if we raise the number of seats from 19 to 20. I urge you to make an amendment to increase the number of seats from 16 to 20, or else I will make an amendment. We've been waiting for 29 years to raise the number of seats by 3. If the situation does not improve after that, when are you going to raise the number of seats again? Mr. Chan? I really feel your passion. When are you going to revisit the issue again? So the premise is that the assumption is that it would not work. I think we should implement it. Well, the situation has changed, and so if you do not make an amendment, I would make an amendment. All right, Chairman. On improving light bus services and shortening waiting times for the public and promoting barrier-free transport or transport for all. We support raising the number of seats to 20. The Deputy Secretary said there might be obstructions during boarding and unboarding. Mr. Chen said something has been done to promote barrier-free access, but what you have done is too little. You said things cannot be achieved in one go, but you are being way too slow. Nothing has been done with light buses. This is a golden opportunity, but yet you are allowing the trade to decide. For the 3 hospital routes, they might not be, well, the most imminent needs might not lie there. A lot of buses are located on slopes or on the hills. Queen Mary Hospital is a good example, and the situation improved after a lift shaft was built. Of course, if you can introduce low-floor light buses, of course we would welcome them. For Prince of Wales Hospital and Princess Margaret Hospital, they are not located on slopes. and they are accessible by low-floor light buses at St. Margaret Hospital, Caritas Hospital, the orthopedic hospital in Saiwan or Sandy Bay. They are very popular, and they are only accessible by minibuses and taxis. And we have so few barrier-free taxis. So why don't you do more? Why can't you introduce a fund or offer tax waivers in order to encourage operators? Otherwise, you can provide a fund to subsidize the trade. We are not asking you to convert all light buses to barrier-free buses, but can you do it gradually? For example, setting an initial target of 5% and then 10%, you need a plan. There is no plan at all at this moment. Mr. Chan. I've heard members on their suggestions. We understand that policy support is needed. This is not about financial arrangement. Well, we also need to trial on the actual operation. We need numbers to back up our policy. If we are too rash, then we might waste our time. But we have the same goals, basically. We want to convert the light buses to low platform buses as soon as possible for wheelchair users.
This policy objective is clear. Otherwise, we won't have this trial scheme. And we have spent some time in picking the model. So during our review, we will keep in mind that there is the need for some direction. Okay, because of time constraints, this discussion is not really related to today's bill. Now, Mr. Chan, the chairman, is here. So at the transport panel, can you please include an agenda item to follow up the results of this trial and what future follow-up will be required? Well, Chairman, in fact, this is related. In the government's paper, in LegCo's paper, this point is made. But then it is not related to the increase in the number of seats. So in the transport panel, I guess that should be a follow-up item for discussion. Chairman, increase of seats includes seats for the disabled. So we are talking about whether the disabled can be facilitated in getting on and off the bus. So I think this is definitely related. Well, of course, when it comes to seats, we cannot exclude the seats for the disabled and the wheelchair-bound passengers. Concerning the bill, Chairman, the bill is about increase of seats. And there is no specification as to whether the seats are for the wheelchair users. There is no mention as to what the seats are, what type of people or passengers the seats are for. When it comes to the actual functioning of the provision and how it will be implemented on different vehicle models, it is not covered by this bill. Concerning the policy and how the bill will be implemented and whether this should be discussed or how in-depth the discussion is will be up to this committee. Chairman, I would like to ask, we do understand that we are here to discuss the increase of seats, but if I move amendment saying that some seats should be made available for the disabled, then it will become part of the law, right? Legal advisor. Just now, Mr. Lau Kwok-fan said if the administration does not make amendment, then he will move CSA. So, legal advisor, what is your comment? Thank you, Chairman. Let me answer this in two parts. First, Mr. Lau would like to move amendments to increase the number of seats from 19 to 20. Now, members, can you please refer to Section 57(4)(a) of the Rules of Procedures? Concerning CSAs, well, they have to be related to the main body of the amendment and the bill. So, if you refer to the long title of the bill, you can see the main content. And if you refer to the long title, it does not only seek to amend the maximum number of seats on minibus. It is very specific. It states clearly that the number of seats should be increased from 16 to 19. So given this very specific figure in the long title, so as long as this number is to be changed, no matter whether it means an increase or decrease, it is possible that it will become out of scope. At the end of the day, whether it is really out of scope, the President will take into consideration the long title of the bill, the administration's response, and also the LegCo brief in making the decision. Of course, members have their right to move CSAs. This Bills Committee also has the right to move CSAs. This is just my comment for members' reference in relation to the long title. Regarding Dr. Fernando Zhang's question, so how many of the seats can be used by wheelchair users or the disabled? At this moment, I may not be able to give a very precise view because I don't know the exact amendment and what its impact will be on the whole bill. So at this moment, it's difficult for me to give a view or advice to Dr. Zhang. Okay, so there are two items that we need to follow up. So these points should be recorded. Next, Mr. Tam. Thank you, Chairman. I don't want to spend too much time on low-floor vehicles, but only the first part of my question is answered just now, not my second part, so I have to follow up. Now, concerning relaxing the requirements, for example, the control model, Chairman, if you ask me the cost, I can't really answer because the duty is different in different countries and perhaps it's more expensive by 10 to 20% than that in Hong Kong. So there is a difference in height by 10 cm, even shorter than a pencil. And then the weight, 5.5 tons. For some models, well, we have electric vehicle models already. So apart from low floor, I think you have to consider the points I just made as well. You haven't answered my question as to whether you have done any study on whether any green minibus route is being affected by the 7-meter restriction. There are not many such restrictions in Hong Kong. So if you haven't done this study, are you going to do one? Besides, about this amendment, will it affect their annual license fee? So when it comes to license fee, is it related to the size of the engine or is it a flat rate for all minibuses? Two questions. Who will take the questions? As far as I know, we are talking about statutory minibus. So the license fee will be the fee payable by minibuses. So have we done any study? I have answered this question already. We have done some studies on minibuses approaching the stops or stations. In some cases, there are obstacles, not necessarily in or at the junctions. Any supplement from the department? We have not got any record. So, do minibuses go through the 7-meter restricted zones? We haven't done this study. But then when minibuses use current transport facilities, including the terminus, those vehicles longer than 7 meters may not be able to use those facilities. So we have to pay attention to this point. Chairman, I do understand that there are issues in relation to the minibus stops or the bans. But then this is a stage that we must go through. So why can't we work on this now? Even if I am to do the study myself, I can complete it in 1 week. So just review all the routes. So then you will see how difficult it will be. Transport Department, can you do an in-depth study? Apart from the bans, there are also the minibus stops and also the transport interchange. Some parts may be narrow, so can you do some study? We have reviewed, or when we review the 3 hospital routes, we will also look at this matter. So can the scope of use be expanded to accommodate the low-floor vehicles? Then we will take into consideration the speed, and at that time we will choose appropriate routes. We may not need to do a territory-wide study. We're talking about 530 odd routes spending public funds. Now, if we are to expand, then we can choose the routes where there are no obstacles. Okay, so you will undertake the study gradually. Mr. Chen Wangben, thank you, Chairman. Just now, Mr. Lau Kok-fan said that he would move CSAs if the government does not take on board his views. Well, the best is for the government to accept our views. Now, with an increase of seats, just now I mentioned fare increase and also driver's salary. If the bill is passed, I think the administration should establish a mechanism to monitor or to calculate whether there will be any improvement to the bus drivers' ecology. Will their salary be raised? And what about fare increase? So I think a report should be given to us. Otherwise, there are more seats, but then if they still raise fares, then I think the public may not find it acceptable. So will there be a mechanism to monitor their operation and their fare increase? Recently, some minibuses applied for fare increase, and so some districts are affected. Before the increase in seats, well, perhaps they first applied for fare increase and then the number of seats will be increased, and then it will be very good for them. So I think during this period, I think they should not be allowed to increase fares. These are 2 issues. First, for fare increase, there is a mechanism. First, the trade will have to propose. The government will not ask for that. So I think the trade has heard members. No, that's not what I mean. Is there a mechanism to monitor drivers' salary and fare increase? That's my first point. Secondly, during this period, because there is high chance that this bill will be passed so that there will be 19 seats, but for some minibus routes, they have already applied for fare increase. Then later on, they will have more seats. Then in the coming years, they don't need to increase further. So can you shelf from giving approval for the time being. Okay, later on the Transport Department will explain. But before that, I will respond to Mr. Chen on the point about 19 or 20. DS, can you please wait? 2 more members would like to speak. So I would like to extend this meeting for 15 minutes. So we will end at 10:40 so that members can ask all the questions. Okay, so on the point about 19 or 20, members in attendance, including Dr. Fernando Zhang, well, 3 of them asked the government to increase the number of seats to 20. And 2 other members did not have clear position. Mr. Tian agreed to 19. So whether or not members will move their own CSAs, well, it depends on the committee's position to the government. I think there is a difference between the committee's position and individual members' position. So it all depends on how the chairman is going to handle this. Let me make a point here. The industry, the trade, has written to us that they find 19 acceptable. And just now, some explanation has been given to about the ecology. That is also my concern. If we dwell too long on that, we may have nothing at the end. So our effort will become futile. Mr. Michael Tian, sorry. About fare increase. If GNB operators, GNB operators can apply for fare increase based on their actual operations. Now, before the increase in the number of seats, can we shelf approval for fare increase? Well, we don't know what the impact will be on the route with the increase in number of seats. Well, we have to wait till that is implemented and then see whether there is the need for fare increase. If they need fare increase, and if we don't allow that to happen, then that will affect whether or not the route can be continued. So we have to be very careful. After there are more seats, we'll have to check whether the operators will increase driver salary. Well, we will definitely pay attention to that. And the operators have said to us that with more seats, if their operations can be improved, then they are willing to raise drivers' salary. Mr. Michael Tian, 3 minutes. Chairman, in relation to fare increase, well, the DS response to me earlier was more positive. The industry said that they are willing to hold a fare increase in the coming 2 to 3 years if this request that was discussed in the past decade can be approved. And the commissioner said that there may be impacts on the route, but then I think we're talking about give and take. There are so many routes, they may be able to make a gain at the end of the day. So I know that you have to be gatekeeper, but then I don't think you need to be too much biased towards the trade instead of the passengers. Okay, today we may be able to have this solved.
Other parts of the trade understood that they have to make compromise as well. As you have said before, we have been making a lot of effort to go from 16 to 19. If this proposal is shelved because of this reason, then perhaps I would also compromise. If I trust your statistics, the ratio of left-behind passengers would go down by 30%. So we are to affect the balance of the trade because of this 2 or 3%. Well, I might not support the proposal just based on the figures because I look at the big picture. So from 16 to 19. You didn't tell us what kind of seats the 19 seats refer to. If the 19 seats can also accommodate PWDs and wheelchair users. So what kind of passengers can be accommodated with 19 seats? Can I make CSAs to specify what kind of passengers can be accommodated with the 19 seats? At this moment, I might not be able to offer a very specific response. I have to see how the CSA is drafted and whether the amendments involve other legislative changes. I would go ahead as long as it's according to procedure. We can also comment on members' CSAs. You didn't talk about the nature of the increase from 16 to 19. What kind of seats are you talking about? I think we should upgrade our facilities. So perhaps we can discuss this later. Perhaps you can write to our legal advisor. If you specify that wheelchair users must be accommodated, then the existing fleets must be upgraded. This is a technical issue. What about the safety devices? They won't be affected. All right. Finally, Dr. Junius Ho, before he speaks, I'd like to say that we cannot enter the clause-by-clause examination. The second meeting will be held on the 2nd of June, which is a Friday at 8:30 a.m. Dr. Junius Ho, 5 minutes. I don't need the 5 minutes. Since we are raising the number of seats to 19, let's go to 20 instead. We have two types of vehicles, the long wheelbase and short wheelbase. Even long wheelbase vehicles only comprise 2%, but the short wheelbase fleets would be phased out sooner or later. I'm not concerned that having 20 seats will cause undue delays. I like the thank the legal advisor for telling us about Rule 57(4)(a). I don't think there would be any issues if the government endorses the number of seats at 19. I don't think going to 20 would be a tall task. I think well, you are just asking if we're allowed to make a CSA. At a panel on transport earlier, there was a strong call for having 20 seats, so I think it's better to have 20. This is not beyond our reach. I urge the Deputy Secretary to increase the number of seats to 20, so we don't have to invoke Rule 57(4)(a). I don't think 57(4)(a) would stop us from making such amendments. I appreciate your work. So it's about having 20 seats. Thank you very much. Our legal advisor will look into the issue with the panel chairman. Date of the next meeting, 2nd of June, which is a Friday at 8:30 a.m. Thank you.